This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
Hello, ladies. I'm excited as we start this third lesson on seeking spiritual beauty because I've entitled this lesson, What Women These Christians Have. Now, why would I make a title like that? In our study of spiritual beauty, we would be wise to pay attention to an historical account relating to the church and particularly to Christian women in the early church. Now, this is a quote, and I want to read it with you and for you, by Tertullian, who was a well-known 3rd century historian. And he's talking about women in the New Testament church. And this is what he says. He mentions the modest garb, meaning clothing, worn by Christian women as indicating their consciousness of their new spiritual wealth and worthiness. They no longer needed the former splendor of outward adornment because they were now clothed with the beauty and simplicity of a Christ-like character. They exchanged the temple, theaters, and festivals of paganism for the home, labored with their hands, cared for their husbands and children, graciously dispensed Christian hospitality, nourished their spiritual life in the worship, service, and sacraments of the church, and in loving ministries to the sick. Their modesty and simplicity were a rebuke to and reaction from the shameless extravagances and immoralities of heathenism. That they were among the most conspicuous examples of the transforming power of Christianity is manifest from the admiration and astonishment of the 1st century pagan Libanus, who exclaimed, "What women these Christians have." Ladies, I want to know if the people in the world can say that about us today. Do they look at us as Christian women and say, "What women these Christians have"? Now let me ask you this. When they look at our dress, are we noticeably more modest? And are we set apart as Christian women by the way we look to the world? Can someone tell you're a Christian by the way that you dress? Or do we submit to every style and fashion of the culture, no matter how it makes us look? You know, it bothers me that Christian women a lot of times say they don't like submission. But we will submit to the fashionable shoes, the fashionable dress, everything about the culture if we think that's what people like. And ladies, every single day of our lives, we are submitting to those things. So what I ask us is, when people look at us as Christian women, can they say, "She's dressed to glorify God"? Not long ago, I was at a youth devotional at the skating rink. And I was sitting behind probably 100 teenagers who were sitting on the floor with their jeans and their tops on, and I was sitting there with my 4-year-old grandson. And we were sitting at the devotional, 100 teenagers in front of us, and ladies, these young girls had their shirts riding up their back, their jeans riding down on their bottoms, and I just happened to think how many backsides my 4-year-old grandson was seeing. He was seeing more backsides in that youth devotional than he should ever see when he's a grown man. And I thought, this is our culture dictating to us how we're supposed to dress, and it is not glorifying to God, and it's not setting us apart from the world. You see, in this matter of modesty, I'm afraid that we as Christian women let the culture instead of the cross rule our lives. And we're teaching this to our daughters. 3 young ladies came into the church building not long ago, had on their short shorts and tops, and they walked into my office and they said, "Oh, Miss Sheila, we shouldn't be here in these clothes." And I thought, if you should not be in the church building in these clothes, why would you be out in the supermarket in those clothes, where there are men who are ogling every time you walk down the aisle, when there are men who are not Christian men looking at you? If you wouldn't wear it in the church building, why would you wear it out in public? But this is the message that we're sending to our young ladies, that you might not come to the church building wearing this, but in the world it's all right. My question is this: what if Jesus was there? Would you be wearing it? Would you be letting your daughters wear it. You see, recently I heard a young lady, Christian lady, make this comment. She was wearing her dress to the prom. It was immodest, and she said, well, it's more modest than most of the girls. Is that how we decide if we're being modest? Because my question to us as Christian women, as mothers, as sisters in Christ, if Jesus was standing right next to you, would you wear that? And if you wouldn't, you need to think twice about it, because Christ is there. I teach on a Christian college campus in the summers, and I teach in a girls' leadership program, girls learning to teach younger girls. And they come into my class after this many years, and you don't see many of the young girls immodest in Miss Sheila's class. You don't see cleavage, and you don't see short shorts, because they know when they come to Miss Sheila's class not to be immodest. So they come in my class and they look wonderful. And then one of the little girls will say, Miss Sheila, will you come to the cafeteria and meet my mother? And of course, I'm delighted to meet her mother. I go to the cafeteria and I walk up to meet the mother, and guess who's immodestly dressed? Yes, many times the young girls' mothers are immodestly dressed. So if we're not modeling modesty to our young ladies, how can we expect them to have it? You see, when we become Christians, our heart changes, and that should be reflected on our outside. And let me share a personal story with you of how this happened in my life. When Stan and I were first married, I was not a Christian. Actually, I had studied journalism. I was going to be a newscaster. So I went to Channel 5 in downtown Nashville, and Bill Jay said to me, who was manager of the station at that time, Sheila, I will hire you as a newscaster, but I don't have a place right now. But I would like for you to audition for the John Davidson show. And this was a show that was just going to be a special one-time show, and I would go out and give John Davidson his water if he asked for it or whatever. And I thought, this will be wonderful. This is my chance at television. So I went home and I said, Stan, I'm going to be on television. And I was so excited about it. Well, in the meantime, I had been studying the Bible with the preacher who married Stan and I. The day we were married, he said, Sheila, I'd like to study the Bible with you. And I said, well, that'll be fine. And so he would come over every Saturday and we would study the Bible. And so in the meantime, as I got this job on television, I'd been studying the Bible. And I'll never forget, I was in a grocery store in downtown Nashville. And I had on my little short shorts and a little halter top. And one of the elders at the congregation where Stan and I had been attending came up to me and was talking to me. And ladies, for the first time in my life, I felt immodest. I began to understand about immodesty. And you see, my part on the John Davidson show was to be immodestly dressed and walk out on that stage in front of all those people and hand John Davidson his water, and Stan would say, you're not going to do that. And I would say, oh yes, I'm going to do that. And my parents would say, oh yes, you need to do that. This is your chance. But you see, that day in H.G. Hills, when I was standing in front of the dairy case talking to that elder, immodestly dressed, I knew that my destiny had changed. Now that I was becoming a Christian, I didn't want to stand in front of the world immodestly dressed. I didn't want to walk out on that stage and have hundreds of thousands of people looking at me immodestly dressed. So I made the decision, the willful choice myself, that I would not be on the John Davidson show, because for the first time in my life, I understood about modesty, and I did not want to be immodestly dressed. You see, when Christ begins to get into you, you have a heart change, and that heart change should be reflected in your outer appearance. Now, when the boys were in high school, they would often go to a banquet night at the end of the year. And the girls would dress all up. And for several years, the boys would go to the banquet and they would come home and say, Mother, my date was so immodestly dressed. I couldn't touch her arm. I couldn't put my arm around her. I couldn't touch anywhere because there wasn't any clothes. There were not any clothes there. And they said, Mother, one girl had on a $1,200 dress. Now, on banquet night, they put on makeup, get immodestly dressed, and their parents send them out on a date. And I have to wonder what the parents are thinking. So the very last year of the banquet, my son had gone to college, and a girl from the high school called him and said, would he go with her to the banquet? And I heard him on the telephone, and he said to her, is your dress modest? Bless his heart, he was so tired of seeing a little girl at school and going out with a streetwalker to the banquet. And why parents let young people do this, I don't understand. So we need to understand that modesty should be a part of our life every single day. There was a panel of young men at Freed-Hardeman College, and we put the boys on one side and the girls on the other and started asking what problems did they have with each other. Do you know what the young men said? Unanimously, the biggest problem we have with you young ladies is the way you dress. How can we keep our hearts pure and our minds pure when you are dressed so scantily? And the young men were saying, help us to be strong. I wonder often if mothers understand this. Do dads understand this? You know, there is legislation in the United States right now that has come up trying to stop lewd dancing on the floor of a basketball game, in the middle of a basketball game. Because I guarantee you, we think that our little girls look cute. We say, oh, isn't she cute out there? But I guarantee you, ladies, there are men sitting up in those stands who are not thinking that our daughters are cute. They're thinking thoughts that they should not be thinking. They're thinking thoughts of the world, and they're not just looking like cute little girls to them. Ladies, understand, we live in a culture where there are pedophiles, where there are men who have sexually molested young girls, and we would let our young girls be out on the dance floor in a situation like that? In high school, our son dated a young lady from the public high school, and she was a cheerleader. And after one of those lewd dance routines in the middle of the basketball game, she came over to our family and she sat down and she was just shaking. Her name was Mandy, and I loved Mandy. And Mandy had a good heart. And she said, Miss Sheila, I don't feel good doing that anymore. She said, I'm going to quit the cheerleading squad. And bless her heart, Mandy did quit the cheerleading squad. And she is a fine young Christian mother today with a fine Christian husband. And when it begins to wear on our consciences, we need to quit. And when Christ gets into our lives and gets into us, we understand that we're not trying to reflect the worldliness. We're trying to reflect the love of Christ. Now, when our little granddaughter Emma was about 3 years old, close to 4, she wanted a Barbie doll. We were in the dollar store one day, and she said, Bibi, I want a Barbie doll. And I said, okay, if we find one, you can get one. So we're walking around the store, in the dollar store. They don't have too many genuine Barbie dolls. They have these fake Barbie dolls. And Emma came up to me and she said, oh, this one's not real. We can't get it. No, this isn't a real Barbie. We can't get it. No, this one's... And then she brought a real Barbie. And she said, oh, look, Bibi, here's a real Barbie. But we can't get it. She's not modest. If a 3.5-year-old knows what modesty is, I have to ask, ladies, does a 16-year-old? Does a 18-year-old? Does her mother? And ladies, let me mention this. If there is a father in your home, a dad, a grandfather, a male in your family who says to you, don't let her wear that in public. Ladies, I'm going to ask you to simply defer to the man in your family because he knows what men in the world are thinking. And if he says, don't let her wear that in public, ladies, don't let her wear it. He knows what's going on in the world. Nathan, our grandson who's 4 now, was watching the Olympics last year. And we were just all watching the Olympics, watching the volleyball game. And I don't know if you understand what they were wearing last year in the Olympics during the volleyball tournaments, but the ladies were scantily dressed. And Nathan turned around to us, he said, let's don't watch this. Those girls don't have enough clothes on. When a 4-year-old young man realizes that, ladies, we understand what modesty is. Let's don't use the excuse that it's simply relevant, that I'm more modest than she is, and so forth. Modesty is reflecting the love of Christ in your life instead of the love of the prince of this world. Last December, some women like diamonds. Personally, for Christmas, I asked for a pond. I wanted my husband to dig a huge pond in our backyard. So he said, okay, and for Christmas, in the month of December, he dug me an 1.5 acre pond. Now, ladies, I love that pond, but what I really wanted to do was stock it with fish so that I can take all my grandchildren fishing. Fishing is something I absolutely love to do. So several months later, we stocked the pond with fish. Now, ladies, I like to catch catfish, but there is a certain kind of bait, we'll call it stinky bait because it is stinky, and there's a certain kind of bait that we use to catch catfish. Now, let me tell you something. I have never known any other kind of fish to bite that bait. With our stinky bait, we put it on that hook and we plan to catch catfish because that's what's going to bite at that bait. And we're not going to catch any other kind of fish because that bait is for the catfish. Now, let me ask you this. What kind of bait are we using when we dress ourselves every day of our lives and walk out into the world? Ladies, what are we trying to catch? Are we trying to catch a look from lustful eyes? Because if we are, and if we dress like that, don't be surprised if we get bitten. Don't be surprised if we catch the wrong kind of fish because we're wearing the wrong kind of bait. And understand that what you see on the outside is the reflection of the heart on the inside. And when there are young men looking for a wholesome young woman to raise their children, they're going to go for the bait that is dressed like someone they want to marry, not someone who every eye in the world has looked at and tried to be with. So understand that how we look on the outside is the reflection of our heart. Now let's go to the book of Proverbs, chapter 11. This is very important for us to understand. And when I found this verse, my husband said, "Where in the world did you find such a verse like that in the Bible?" This verse became very illuminating to me when our adopted son bought his girlfriend a potbelly pig, which was fine, but they happened to be in college at the time. And so he bought her this potbelly pig to have at college. You know, it dawned on me in a few days, how is that pig going to keep living at college? And sure enough, within 2 weeks, they were bringing the pig to my house. Now, this potbelly pig grew huge. And every time I would drive into the front gate at our house, here in the corner of our yard would be this huge potbelly pig. But that little pig helped me to understand this verse, Proverbs 11:22. Let's look at that. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout. Ladies, that is like me taking my golden rings and taking them out in that front yard and putting them on that pig's nose. As a ring of gold in a pig's nose. That would be like me taking my jewels out in that front yard and putting them in that pig's nose. And let's see what the rest of this verse says. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a lovely lady who lacks discretion. Now, what in the world is discretion? When I teach the younger ladies, they invariably raise their hand. Miss Sheila, what does discretion mean? And ladies, I'm afraid that a lot of times today we don't know what discretion is. Certainly we're not practicing it. But there are two parts to discretion. And let me illustrate them for you. If there was the most beautiful woman that any of us had seen physically, we think she's beautiful. And she walks in this room and walks down in front of us and we think she's lovely, but she has on short shorts, a little tight top. Do you know what she looks like to the Lord? Let's see what the verse says. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a lovely woman who lacks discretion. And ladies, if this beautiful, physically beautiful woman is immodestly dressed, she lacks discretion. Because you see, part of discretion is modesty, how we look. And another part of discretion are the things that we say. If that same lady came down that aisle, she was dressed to the nine. She was dressed beautifully, perfectly, everything matched. She looked beautiful. Nobody could say she wasn't modest. And she came and sat down, and we all thought, oh, she's lovely. But she opened her mouth and she started talking about her best friend like she was a dog, or curse words started coming out of her mouth. Do you know what she would look like to the Lord? A gold ring in a pig's nose. Because you see, ladies, she would lack discretion. Discretion consists of how you look outwardly and the things that come out of your mouth. And let me show you something in Proverbs chapter 2, verse 11. God doesn't tell us to be discreet just because it's a rule that says you can't do this, you shouldn't do this. God tells us to be discreet for our own protection. In Proverbs 2:11, God tells us discretion will preserve you. Understanding will keep you. Ladies, if we have discretion in the way that we look, then people aren't going to be always looking at us with lustful eyes. If we have discretion in the things that we say, we're going to guard our tongues and keep ourselves out of so much trouble. God tells us that discretion will preserve us. Let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 2. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. And this is how Christian women are to appear in the body of Christ. 1 Corinthians 2, chapter 9, verses 9 and 10. In like manner also, that the women adorn themselves with modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. Ladies, our adornment should be our service to the Lord. And I need to tell you about a report I have that's called Dangerous Access. This report was written in the year 2000, and it was about how in many of our public libraries, men can walk into the public libraries, log on to the computers, and see all manner of pornography. Men can come off the street, homeless men, young men, anybody can come in, log onto that computer for an hour and watch lewd, disgusting pornography. And ladies, those screens are open to everybody in the library. And the librarians say they can't keep that from coming in. They use the idea that that is freedom of speech. And so in our public libraries daily, men are logging onto these computers, watching all kinds of pornography. There have actually been reports of women who go in and clean the restrooms, who have found all kinds of filth in those restrooms after men have sat for hours and viewed pornography in our public libraries. Now let me ask you this. Would you send your young daughter immodestly dressed into the public library where men are sitting there viewing pornography? Ladies, let's don't hide our heads in the sand. We must know that this is going on. And we must know that God talks to us about modesty and discretion to preserve us. He hasn't just given us a book of rules that say, don't do this, don't do that. He loves us. He doesn't want us to be the bait for somebody who is in there viewing pornography. Another popular thing recently has become prepaid pornography cards. Now, this is where you can go into a 7-Eleven, and I don't know that that's the name of the store per se, but you can go into one of these convenience stores. You can buy a prepaid pornography card, and so no one has to trace who is using the pornography. You just prepay for that card. You can get on any computer and watch pornography anywhere. And then you wonder why we're told to be modest. Ladies, I tell the young ladies all the time, if something is not on sale, don't advertise it. Make sure we understand that. I would like for you sometimes just to look through your family pictures. Start with your baby pictures and start with the children as they're growing. Look in your family albums and ask yourself what the girls and the women in your family are advertising. You see, I was told one time by an elderly preacher, he said, Sheila, in the church, you need to dress like you want the men of the congregation and the men of the world to see you as a sister. And ladies, that's been some of the best advice I've ever gotten. When you dress like a sister, then people are looking at you as their sister in Christ and not someone that they have lustful eyes for. So if we can just decide that we're going to dress like our sister. Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 4. I would like for us to look at 1 Peter 3, and before we look at verse 4, let's look at 1 Peter 3:3, which tells us, do not let your adornment, your outward appearance, be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. And now look at verse 4. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart. Do you remember what we said about Eliab when he walked before Samuel? And Samuel said, surely this is God's anointed. But do you know what the Bible told us? God looks at the heart. So let it be the hidden person of the heart, the part that people don't see, with the incorruptible beauty. Ladies, that incorruptible beauty means a beauty that will never fade, a beauty that is for eternity, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. Ladies, what God is looking for is our willful submission to His Word and to the things that God would have us to do. And in another one of our lessons, we're going to study deeply this idea of submission as the Bible teaches it. The Bible teaches submission to be something totally different from what many times we see it in the world. So we're going to look at submission, but having a meek and gentle spirit is what God is looking for. In Galatians 5, verses 22 through 25, we're also told something about how we're supposed to be clothed. We're supposed to be clothed with the fruit of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love. Ladies, fill your life with love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law, and those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Ladies, that means that our adornment comes from the inside. I read recently the story of a doctor. She was very young, and she was in a bad car accident, and her face was just terribly mangled in the car accident. As a matter of fact, she was very hideous to look at. And she still went to med school. She became a doctor, and she thought, what can I do? She said, there's no way my face can be fixed. So she went to a foreign country as a doctor. And this lady had a wonderful compassion for her patients. She actually loved her patients, and they knew that. And I'll tell you how we saw the beauty from this young doctor. Every time the patients heard this young doctor's footsteps in the hallway, their faces brightened up. Their countenance got so much better, and they would just smile knowing that this doctor, who had a hideous physical appearance, was coming into their room. And do you know why? Because she had the hidden beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. And she had the fruits of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit in her life. And the patients knew that. And do you know where her beauty came from? Her beauty was reflected in the eyes and the smiles of those patients every time that she walked into the room. And ladies, that's how our beauty should be, reflected in the eyes of the people that know us. And I would like very much for us to go to Proverbs chapter 31. This chapter helps us as women to understand many of the qualities that God would like for us to have. In Proverbs 31, let's start with verse 10. Who can find a virtuous wife? You know, the original of that text really says, who can find a wife of valor? A wife of valor. A wife who exemplifies all forms of excellence. Because you see, in the sight of God, that's beauty. Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her. Ladies, do we understand what that means? Can the heart of our husband safely trust us? Now, how can we apply that in our everyday lives? Ladies, are you spending more money than your husband makes? Because you see, how can he safely trust you if you're spending more money than he could possibly ever make? Or what about when you sit with your girlfriends and talk about your husbands, do you say negative things? You know, I talked to a woman recently who had been at an all-girl outing. All of these women were married, and they had sat around and started talking negatively about their husbands. And she said, you know, one would just say, well, my husband never does this, and my husband never does that. And they started talking about their husbands, and she said, and you know what? She said, I just joined in. And I just started talking about all the negative things about my husband. And she said, on the way home, I thought, you know, He really does those things. I don't know why I married him. And on the way home, she said, the more I talked about the negativity, she said, the more it just kept dwelling in me. And then she said, I got home and I thought, yes, I married a sinner and he has some problems. But you know what? He married a sinner too. And I'm sure there are things about me that he doesn't like. And she said, I got down on my knees and I said, Father, forgive me for talking like that about my husband. And please help me to see the good in him. Now let me ask you this. Can that man trust safely in his wife? Yes, he can. Our husbands need to know that they can go off to work and not worry about how their children are being taken care of, how their home is being taken care of, what their wife is saying about them. You see, that's part of this gentle and quiet spirit that is our adornment, so that people can say, what women these Christians have. Please understand that in your life, that the more you dwell on the negative things in your husband, in your family, the harder it's going to be for you to live joyfully as a spiritual Christian woman. The heart of her husband safely trusts her. She will have no lack of gain. Now let me show you another part of Proverbs 31, and let's go to verse 28. This is one of the most rewarding things of being a strong Christian. Proverbs 31, verse 28. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Now look at verse 30. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Ladies, that's the kind of life that we want to live. We don't need all of the accolades that the world may give us. We only need to know that we are serving the Lord and we want the Lord to care about what we're doing. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her own works praise her in the gates. This is the kind of life that a spiritual Christian woman will want to live. I have a simple question. If you have ever seen spiritually beautiful women, which I know you have you ever picked one out and thought, I would like to be spiritual like her? If I could just be more like her. I've got to ask you this question. Have you ever seen a woman whom you admired as being a spiritually minded woman? Have you ever seen her in public, immodestly dressed? I doubt it. And let me ask you this. If you have seen someone that you look up to and admire and you think that she's spiritually beautiful, have you ever heard curse words come out of her mouth? I doubt it. Have you ever heard her talk about someone behind their back? I doubt it. You see, everything about us on the outside should reflect our inner love for the Lord and for other Christians. Ladies, there was a young man and he was training for the Olympics. He had trained for 2 years to be in the Olympics. His Olympic thing that he did was jump the high wire. He could jump that high rod. I mean, he could stop and jump over that rod. And he was great at it. And 2 days before the Olympics, he ran out to make the jump and he couldn't jump. He just couldn't jump. Now, he had practiced this for 3 years. Every day he had been able to run out and jump over that high bar, but he couldn't do it. And his coach was standing to the side, and he was supposed to compete the next day. And his coach came out and he said, son, I'll tell you what you have to do. He said, you run to that high bar and you throw your heart over first and your body will follow. Well, the young man just didn't know. But he got back and he ran to the high bar, and he got to the high bar and he pictured his heart going over first and he jumped. And when you throw your heart over first, your body will follow. And ladies, if we want to be spiritually beautiful, we need to have a heart that belongs to God. We need to have a heart that's in love with God. And ladies, when you walk out into the world, your physical appearance and your countenance will show the world that your heart belongs to God. Thank you.